This day and time. What happened today, years ago?
Okay, let's unpack this. You know how sometimes a date just passes by, feels completely ordinary, and you never stop to think, like, what incredible moments in history might be tied to it?
Yeah, totally.
Well, today, we're doing exactly that for June 8th.
It's surprising, isn't it? You sent us some material, and looking through it, this one date, June 8th, connects three, well, incredibly different events.
Right, across different times, different places.
Exactly. We're talking about a naval mystery right in the middle of the Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a dramatic global manhunt that finally reached its end in London.
Yeah, a big one.
And something completely different, a quiet, almost unseen revolution that ended up shaping the internet as we, experience it today.
Absolutely. And the sources we looked at, they really lay out these like three distinct slices of history.
All hitting on June 8th.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our goal here in this deep dive is basically to pull out the key facts.
The surprise.
Yeah, the surprises, the insights from the material, and figure out, why these specific moments, so different, ended up sharing the same date.
So let's dive in. What happened on June 8th across these very different moments?
Okay, first up, let's go back to 1967. It's the height of the Six-Day War in the Middle East, a really tense, complex period.
Right.
And on June 8th of that year, something, profoundly tragic and controversial happened in the Mediterranean. It involved a U.S. ship, the USS Liberty.
That's right, the USS Liberty. It was a technical research ship, basically, and it was attacked.
Yeah, and the impact was immediate and devastating.
Yeah, 34 Americans killed on board, and over 170 were injured.
That's a huge number.
Yeah.
So the official account that emerged, the sources say, was that Israel admitted to carrying out the attack.
They did. They stated it was a case of mistaken identity. Chaos of war. They thought the Liberty was an enemy vessel.
But here's where the enduring mystery really begins, right? The sources really highlight this.
Oh, definitely. For many Americans, especially, people involved or those who investigated later, that explanation, friendly fire.
They just didn't buy it.
Not at all.
And that skepticism, it hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
The sources note that the attack led to years, decades even, of questions, investigation.
Congressional hearings.
Right. But, crucially, no single answer, no conclusion has ever really satisfied everyone involved or everyone watching.
And looking at the bigger picture, the material we read really shows why this event is still so significant. It's consistently framed as, one of the major unresolved mysteries of the Cold War era.
A symbol, almost.
Yeah, a powerful symbol of the complexity and, frankly, the tension that can sometimes exist even between, close military allies. The fact that it's still debated so heavily decades later, that's a key part of its story.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, how certain historical events just become these, ingrained mysteries, resistant to official explanations. Why do you think this one, in particular, has sparked such long-lasting controversy?
Well, I think, the nature of the attack itself combined with some conflicting accounts, and then you layer on the whole geopolitical context.
The Six-Day War, the Cold War.
Exactly. All that created fertile ground for doubt. When facts are disputed or maybe motives seem unclear, it just allows multiple interpretations to stick around.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
So, leaving the sea and those Cold War tensions, let's jump forward just 1 year. Still June 8th.
Right, just 1 year later.
But now the focus is completely different. A dramatic global chase coming to an end.
Yes, we shift gears completely. Now we're in London, 1968. On June 8th of that year, at Heathrow Airport, a man was apprehended.
A huge moment.
And it marked the conclusion of one of the most extensive manhunts in, recent history, really.
And that man was James Earl Ray. The sources clearly identify him as the individual accused of assassinating Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. earlier that year.
A towering figure.
Absolutely. Someone whose role in the American Civil Rights Movement just profoundly shaped the nation.
And the search for Ray, wow, it spanned continents. The material describes it as a truly global operation.
Yeah, it wasn't just a U.S. thing.
No way. He'd been on the run for over 2 months after the assassination, traveling through multiple countries.
Using aliases.
Right, various aliases, expertly forged identification papers. He was really trying to evade capture.
So his arrest on June 8th, That closed the immediate chapter, right? Tracking down the accused killer.
It did, but the aftermath of his arrest, as the sources detail, brought a whole new layer of complexity.
Because initially, Ray pleaded guilty to the assassination charges.
He did, but then later he recanted that plea.
Changed his story.
Completely. According to the material, he started claiming there was a larger conspiracy behind Dr. King's death. Said he was merely a pawn.
Just caught up in something bigger.
That was his claim.
And this reversal, this is what really transformed the case, isn't it? The sources highlight how Ray's claims turned the assassination into the subject of, well, countless conspiracy theories.
Oh yeah. Books, documentaries, they continue to fuel debate even today.
Decades later.
Absolutely. But regardless of those later claims and all the theories that popped up, the date of his arrest, June 8th, it still holds significant historical weight.
Sure.
It really marked the closing of a very dark, very turbulent chapter in recent American history. The 60s were characterized by so much political violence and division.
It's striking, though, how one event, an arrest, can sort of simultaneously bring closure to a manhunt.
Right, the chase is over.
But at the same time, ignite decades of more questions and speculation.
It really does show how historical events can have these multiple layers of impact, doesn't it? There's the immediate outcome, and then there's this long tail of debate and interpretation that just keeps going.
Okay, so we've had military conflict, political violence. Let's take a completely different turn now. We're jumping forward several decades.
Okay.
Still on June 8th, but now it's 1995. And this next event, well, it couldn't be more different from the first two.
That's for sure. We're moving into the world of technology, specifically the burgeoning days of the public internet.
The early web.
Exactly. On June 8th, 1995, a programmer named Rasmus Lerdorf did something seemingly small. He just, shared a personal tool he'd built online.
Just put it out there.
Yeah.
And that simple tool, the sources explain, was the very beginning of something called PHP.
PHP, which would grow, kind of unexpectedly, to become one of the most widely used web programming languages globally.
Quietly powering a massive chunk of the internet.
It's wild when you think about its origins, though. The material points out how incredibly humble it was.
Totally. Rasmus initially created it just for a personal need.
Yeah.
He wanted to track visitors to his own website.
That's it.
That was it. There wasn't some grand vision like, I'm going to build a world-changing piece of software right then.
But clearly its utility resonated. People found it useful.
Massively useful. The sources really highlight its huge, almost unbelievable impact over time. PHP just rapidly gained traction.
Became the fundamental building block for millions upon millions of websites. I mean, think about this. Major platforms you use every single day have roots in PHP.
Like what?
Well, WordPress, for example. The sources mention it powers over 40% of the entire world's websites now. That started with PHP.
Wow, 40%.
And early Facebook, famously, relied heavily on PHP too.
Okay, so if we contrast this with, say, the USS Liberty Incident or James Earl Ray's arrest, this wasn't loud, right? It wasn't dramatic.
Not at all. As the sources describe it, the rise and impact of PHP was a quiet, almost silent revolution.
Yeah, silent is a good word for it, yet its significance is, well, it's hard to overstate, isn't it?
Absolutely. This small piece of code, first shared on June 8th, 1995, it silently and fundamentally reshaped how we live, how we work, how we connect in the digital age.
It's highly likely, almost certain, that you listening have interacted with something built with PHP today, probably multiple times, without even realizing it.
It's just woven into the fabric of the web, and it's a powerful illustration, I think, that history isn't solely defined by the major headlines,
The conflicts, the arrests.
Right. Sometimes the most profound, widespread changes start with a quiet act of creation or sharing, maybe in a completely different sphere you weren't even looking at.
So bringing these three distinct stories together then, June 8th, it connects a naval attack shrouded in enduring mystery.
Still debated.
The arrest that marked the end of a massive manhunt and closed a tragic chapter of political violence.
Though maybe opened another chapter of questions.
True. And the quiet launch of a programming tool that helped build the digital world we inhabit.
The material we looked at describes these really effectively as different slices of history, all linked by this one date.
Yeah, slice is good.
You've got an unsolved attack, a tragic saga reaching a point of, closure with an arrest, and then a simple piece of code that just started an era. It really emphasizes that history unfolds in so many different ways.
Absolutely. Sometimes it's loud and dramatic, filled with conflict and consequence, obvious impact.
Front page news.
Exactly. And sometimes, like with PHP, it's a silent shift. It happens in the background, and it ends up changing the world just as profoundly, maybe even more so.
So maybe to quickly summarize our deep dive into June 8th, we've seen how this single date holds connections to these high-drama events, right? The controversial USS Liberty Incident, the arrest closing the hunt for Martin Luther King Jr.'s accused assassin, events marked by questions, lingering debate.
Yep. And then, in stark contrast, it's also the date linked to that quiet, world-changing technical innovation that became PHP.
Silently shaping the foundation of the internet for, well, billions of people.
These incredibly diverse stories, all linked by just one date on the calendar, they truly highlight the varied ways history unfolds, don't they?
Yeah, sometimes through conflict, sometimes through crime and its aftermath, and sometimes through creation and innovation that changes everything without making a sound.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to mull over. Building on this idea of those quiet moments changing the world.
Okay.
How many other seemingly ordinary dates on your calendar might hold such a surprising, diverse tapestry of events? You know, how many quiet shifts, like the sharing of a small piece of code, have reshaped our lives without us even noticing the date they began? What does that tell us about how we perceive and understand history, and maybe how we understand change itself?
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more history daily.